Today is Wednesday, June 6th, and I'm your host, Paula Hersey. On today's show, we explore what the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program could mean for Barnstable's coastal resiliency planning, and we learn about the resources that have made it out of conference committee on Beacon Hill. First, a look at today's weather. Still seems a little chilly for June for me, but at least the sunshine is warm. Cloudy skies early, then partly cloudy in the afternoon. High near 60, winds north-northeast at 10 to 15. Great evening for a bike ride, sunsets at 8:12. Let's start with some news you can use. As Katie Service soars to her new position as manager of Barnstable Municipal Airport at the end of June, a new assistant manager flies in from Florida. Katie Service introduced Matthew Elia, the town of Barnstable, at the town of Barnstable's meet and greet event this past Monday.
Hi, I'm here today with Matt Elia, who is our newest assistant airport manager at Barnstable Airport. Matt comes to us with a plethora of background in the aviation field. He was at Mansfield Airport for nearly 10 years, where he got a lot of experience working as a fixed base operator. He did everything from snow removal and maintenance of the airfield to getting customers to come in and learn how to fly at the airport. He moved on from there to New Bedford Regional Airport, where he was the assistant airport manager. He was integral in getting elite airways to that airport and having them come and supply seasonal service. And then from there he went down to Florida and was working as an airport manager for a seaplane base, where Matt really got a lot of different experience and worked with some alligators. So we're really happy that Matt's here. He has a commercial pilot's license and has a real lot to offer the Barnstable Municipal Airport and to help us move forward and to develop this airport. Matt?
Well, thank you, Katie. I appreciate it. I'm very excited to be here on Cape Cod at the Barnstable Municipal Airport. It's a lot of fun. From Massachusetts originally, so I'm excited to be here and work on moving the airport forward and the new and exciting things that are to come here at the Barnstable Municipal Airport.
The severe damage caused by this winter's nor'easters illustrates how incredibly important it is that we plan and prepare now for the impacts of climate change. Through the Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Program, municipalities work through a community-based workshop process to identify key climate-related hazards, vulnerabilities, and strengths, develop adaptation actions, and prioritize next steps. Elizabeth Jenkins, Director of Planning and Development, helps us understand what that grant means to the town of Barnstable's coastal resiliency planning. Municipalities are on the front line of climate change and climate resiliency. Just recently, the Baker and Polito administration gave money to the town of Barnstable to develop plans for coastal resiliency. With me today, Elizabeth Jenkins, Planning and Development.
Hi.
Hi. So you're going to give us a little background. I think our residents where are we as a town in coastal resiliency? These northeast storms this past year, I think, brought home to a lot of us that we're sitting on a sandbar.
Absolutely. So, I mean, Barnstable is on the front lines of these issues related to coastal resiliency and climate change. We have over 60 miles of coastline in the town of Barnstable. A lot of that developed supporting residential property and maritime related business. So, you know, this is an important issue for us fiscally, economically. So it's something we have been working to address over the years. You know, kind of research and understanding of this issue isn't something new to the town. We've always participated with state and regional partners in what we call our hazard mitigation planning process. So essentially, instead of planning for a storm when you know it's coming, planning for it ahead of time, looking ahead. How do we build resiliency? How do we protect ourselves from the impacts of coastal storms or climate change or you know, other sort of impacts that perhaps people don't think of, like wildfires. Actually a very high wildfire risk, but you know, dealing with a wide range of impacts that you know, that a changing climate brings is a process that we've gone through. So we have we haven't updated, or we've been working to update our hazard mitigation plan. So that's, again, a plan that we do in partnership with the state and regional partners. So we've gone through a lot of that research, and we've also participated in other sort of outreach efforts with community partners. People might remember we did a great effort a few years ago with the Wacoit Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve and Consensus Building Institute, some educational partners at MIT, University of Vermont, to get a better understanding of what our kind of general vulnerabilities are in terms of climate change. But we're trying to focus on how do we get to more specific kind of needs that we need to address when we're thinking about climate change vulnerability.
Right, and when we talk, there's vulnerability and then there's resiliency. There's so many, words thrown along, mitigation, hazards, those kinds of things. When we talk about our town, our tax base, our property taxes and the money that the town raises as revenue, this doesn't go into a lot of this planning. These are grants that the town actually writes. So this was a grant that your department wrote to ask for monies from the state.
That's correct. So the state has a program through the Coastal Zone Management Program, what they call the MVP grants, Municipal Vulnerability Preparedness Grants, and essentially gives communities resources to do this kind of advanced planning for climate change. So the Planning and Development Department, we partnered with Department of Public Works, Marine and Environmental Affairs to put in a grant application to the state to help advance this planning here in the town of Barnstable.
Right. And you've done a lot of this planning already, which you kind of touched upon. What are some of the things that people should know about what is the difference between resiliency and mitigation?
Right.
Right?
Yeah, so it's just a quick, 101. When we talk about risks, those are, what sort of hazards out there do we need to be aware of? I think we all know them. They're hurricanes and nor'easters and things like wildfire. Those are our risks. And then we look at what are our vulnerabilities? Where are specific locations in town that are subject to flooding, for example. So what we're really looking to do through this process is to, start to break down more specific action items that would act as mitigation items. So, how do we, again, kind of look forward in the cycle, this idea of trying to, instead of, a disaster comes through and it does damage and then you rebuild, how do you break that cycle? How do you protect yourself in the first place? And so when we talk about building resiliency, through the implementation of mitigation actions, resiliency can take a lot of forms. It can be the resiliency of our infrastructure to a storm. It can be environmental resiliency and the health of our ecosystem. It can be social resiliency. How do we bounce back as a community together? How does a neighborhood come together? Or how does the business community support each other after these major events going forward? So there are a few different lenses to look at it, but all, as you said, I think we have started to see almost a new normal when it comes to the frequency and severity of these hazard events. So
well, March was the perfect example. I mean, there wasn't any prediction. We felt that we had skated through winter. I certainly did. I was like, this is great. There was nothing, no snow to shovel. But that's really not the issue, is that, 3 back-to-back nor'easters that hit our coast, we have significant damage in the town of Barnstable. The Millway area on the north side, the water piles up in the bay all the time. So now with this, there's at least some understanding from the state level, maybe now possibly the federal level again, but the state level has taken a commitment. I mean, the Baker administration is committed to coastal resiliency in all of Massachusetts.
Absolutely, and I think that is because there are so many coastal communities in Massachusetts that are so dependent on that identity, being on the coast, being on the water. It is so important to our economy and to our future to be able to think about and plan and predict these events. And again, I think what March showed us is, if you look at those kind of vulnerability predictions that we thought were going to happen 10 or 15 years from now, I mean, we were starting to see that level of event happening right now. So, you know, we think this is an important priority and one that we look forward to working on.
Excellent. So we'll have you back so you can talk a little bit more as, you know, once you get more information. It was just announced yesterday.
Just announced yesterday on beautiful Nauset Beach. It was a great day for it. But yeah, I mean, this will definitely be a community process.
Right.
The MVP process is all about community engagement, you know, understanding from the perspective of people who live and work in your community, what they experience and what they feel like we need to be planning for as a town. So much more to come on this.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Elizabeth.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Weeks in Committee Conference on Beacon Hill has paid off in resources from the state coming to Barnstable and the Cape Cod region. Senator Julian Cyr joined us in studio to highlight some of the programs and initiatives. Well, it's almost time at that State House. Things are really moving fairly quickly. Lots of things have gotten passed in the last couple of times that we've spoken to Senator Cyr. You're with us today to bring us up to date. There's a whole lot of money coming to Cape Cod as well as the town of Barnstable.
There's a lot, and Paula, this is this sort of crunch time, right? The legislature, we're in our final sort of 6-7 weeks. The formal sessions end July 31st. So, you know, a whole slew of activity that we're doing. But probably the biggest thing we do every year is our annual budget. So the House takes up their budget in April. The Senate, we just took up our budget in late May. I was able to secure a significant amount of resources for local priorities, over $600,000 in local priorities, as well as a number of important state initiatives. And hopefully we'll be able to get these out of the conference committee that we're now in, and they'll be coming here to Barnstable and across Cape Cod and the islands shortly thereafter. The fiscal year will start July 1st.
July 1st, yes.
Yep.
We at the town know that,
too. You
deeply
do.
At this time in June.
Yep.
No pencils ordered today.
Yes.
But we're going to go through these. Some are a little meatier than others, but let's start with some of that public safety and the opioid crisis. There was some real work done there this year.
Well, and this has just been something that, you know, we continue to have a really big challenge here, especially here in Barnstable. You know, if you look at the burden of the opioid epidemic, and you also look at, you know, we've been really thinking about how do you support the community in addressing chronic homelessness and the real sort of intersection you're seeing of folks who are dealing with drug addiction, who are chronically homeless, who have mental health and behavioral health issues. So I actually filed an amendment that's going to bring $45,000 to the Barnstable Police Department to support their community impact unit, which is something I think has done tremendous work here. And it's going to support the community impact unit to work with a few other organizations, VinFen and NAMI, other you know, mental health and advocacy organizations. And it's going to look to do a few things. One, this winter when we had that really big cold snap and that storm around January 6th, the Community Impact Unit and Sergeant Ellis did sort of yeoman's work to get folks into, those chronically homeless folks into housing. That's going to provide some resources for that, and also resources for coordination. So that's going to make a really big difference. You know, there's also money that we got in the budget that's going to provide bulk purchasing of Narcan to nonprofits and to health providers, as well as our police and first responders already get that. So that's a big win. You'll recall we talked a lot about that municipal police training.
Right.
We did it again in the Senate budget just to make sure that we're going to get it done by the end of session. So that's a really big priority of our police chiefs that we're having done.
And now it's always funded now.
Once we get it passed, it'll start having a stable funding source January 1st, 2019. So just sort of a smattering of the issues, and also was able to secure $50,000 to do intervention work in schools as it relates to prevention and intervention for opioids. So really trying to make sure that we have some targeted resources, particularly here in the Mid-Cape where we've got such a challenge and a problem.
Right. So we move on from that crisis of opioid and all of the things that happen with that. Housing's like right next to it as one of those hot button issues that we just here in the Mid-Cape and across Cape Cod are just dealing with all sorts of different things. And there's money coming for some housing initiatives.
So last year I prioritized with some of my colleagues to get the housing court expanded to here to Barnstable. So I led an amendment to fund the tenancy preservation program. This is a program that works in the housing court to help keep people in their homes. We see, and particularly this is for older adults, you see a lot of older adults who maybe aren't able to stay in their homes, maybe they have some challenges and issues going on, and housing courts are a really great way to bring kind of all the players to the table to help make sure that we keep people housed, we keep people from getting homeless. So that's really important. You know, so those are resources on housing. I mean, there's a whole host of other issues on housing we're working on. Hopefully going to take up a housing production and zoning reform bill this session as well, which will provide some support, you know, some making sure that we're keeping up with housing production.
All right. So opioid, housing, health, and education, I mean, they all three always go hand in hand,
Yeah.
it seems. So talk a little bit about some of the monies for health and education.
So the health and education piece I talked a little bit about, around the $50,000 to do education work and health intervention work in our schools. We also, something that I've been really committed to, if you look at some of the most vulnerable young people in our state, LGBTQ youth are among those young people. I was able to secure $500,000 to make sure that we fund a program at the Department of Public Health, which is called Youth at Risk. So it goes to some of the highest risk, most vulnerable young people, teens in the state, and I was able to secure those dollars and to make sure that we take a look at particularly LGBTQ youth. If you look at homeless unaccompanied youth, about 40% of those individuals identify as LGBTQ. So working on that piece, and I filed a few amendments we weren't able to get done, a big chunk of resources for community health centers. It was an amendment that I did get into a healthcare bill we passed last November. Filed the amendment again to try to get it done in the budget. Wasn't as successful there, but you know, often you try to throw as many things in the wall as you can, and you see what can stick.
Right, and again, all of those conference committees, you know, a lot of these things are being hashed out,
Yep.
and it takes some time, you know, a little give from each side as well. So small business always seems to bear the brunt of a lot of things here in the state. Having been a small business owner in my previous lifetime, know and feel the pain of small business. So what's happening on the front there?
So a number of things. I think knowing the pain of small business, one of the more recent pains that we've had for small business, and actually for public service organizations as well, has been something called the Employer Medical Assistant contribution. This was a mandate actually first proposed by Governor Baker to have businesses and employers pitch in for health insurance. The governor proposed it at $2,000 surcharge per employee per year who's on either Mass Health or the Connector Care. We negotiated in the legislature, we got that to $750 per employee per year, but it's been a really big burden, especially on small businesses, seasonal businesses, nonprofit entities, any entities that especially have pretty limited day-to-day cash flow. So what was happening is you'd get these, you know, you'd get this unexpected bill from the Commonwealth, you know, April 1st, you owe $15,000 and it's due April 30th. That has just been untenable for small businesses. So I filed an amendment which we adopted that's going to require the administration to establish some sort of hardship waiver for those small businesses, for seasonal businesses, you know, for entities like Capabilities or skilled nursing facilities, right, that have really limited cash on hand and that are really burdened by this. Also filed an amendment to provide resources for technical assistance to small businesses who are just getting started. That's really important. And then, you know, here the bread and butter of our economy is, and likely is going to be for quite some time, is tourism and marketing. The state provides a pretty meager chunk of money for this. So in a $40 billion budget, we allocate $10 million for tourism promotion. But what the state had been doing is we weren't allocating that money in an upfront way. So if you talk to Wendy Northcross at the Chamber or the folks in the Nantucket Chamber, Martha's Vineyard Chamber, there was really no predictability for them to use the money from the state to build a marketing plan. So I filed an amendment which was adopted that essentially requires that the monies that the Commonwealth is providing to these tourism promotion agencies, that they get the money up front at the beginning of the fiscal year so they can plan. So that again is going to be another kind of win for, you know, predictability. We still need to up, you know, what we contribute for tourism promotion. If you look at the amount of money that tourism brings into the Commonwealth through revenue and meals tax and occupancy and all that stuff, we're definitely not getting our fair share. But this is going to make a little more sense.
Excellent. And the last one, near and dear to my heart, the environment. Lots of things happening. Obviously, coastal resiliency is a big issue. What is secured there?
So stay tuned, first of all. we're going to be taking up an environmental bond bill in the coming weeks and a climate change bill that's going to provide a lot of resources around coastal resiliency. My colleague Will Crocker actually got some resources for Barnstable that we're hoping to get in for Blish Point, which has had some up on the north side had some real issues. I was able to secure monies, $80,000 for beach conservation programs, also monies to help expand farmers markets and some of those food nutrition programs that we have in schools. And then, a big piece that I've really been focusing on with my colleague Vinny DiMacedo, who represents the Upper Cape and Plymouth, and the whole Cape delegation has been really around looking at accountability for Pilgrim Nuclear Power Station. Pilgrim's slated to close next May 2019. This is sort of the most crucial period. How we go about what happens in the next year is going to determine whether or not you and I and our communities are talking about and are worried about this plant for the next several years or the next several decades. So I worked with Senator DiMacedo to file an amendment, which he got adopted, that's going to convene a working group among state agencies. There's various state agencies that have oversight here, right? Health, emergency response, public safety, environmental protection. Coordinate that, bring the Attorney General in, so we can get as much leverage as we can with Entergy, the utility that owns the plant, and with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the federal agency, to make sure that we have a swift decommissioning and that we move, particularly the spent fuel that's in that spent fuel pool, which is pretty volatile, moving that out of the spent fuel pool into at least dry cask storage, if not getting it off the site. And so that amendment's a big deal. And we're going to hopefully get that done in the final conference budget as well.
Right. And that's something that I don't think people realize is that when you say we're going to close Pilgrim, it just doesn't they just don't lock the doors and walk away.
No. They have about over $1 billion of activity that needs to happen. First, you got to move the fuel. This spent fuel pool is far over capacity. I've always had really big concerns about it. I actually worry that when the plant stops generating electricity, you actually, that in some ways there's almost more risk involved with that spent fuel pool. And also, for the town of Plymouth, this has been, a sizable employer, but this is a sizable chunk of their coastline, their land. And so, making sure that the plant is decommissioned, done so swiftly and responsibly to ensure that we're safeguarding public health is really crucial. And so, we're doing everything we can to hold them accountable, to provide oversight. We've got limited authority here from a state level, but anything we can do, both from the bully pulpit, from oversight, from accountability, a little pleading and begging as well. And we've been working very closely as a delegation. This delegation works very closely in a bipartisan fashion to get things done, and that's what we're going to keep doing.
Great. Next steps. Where are you at?
Next steps. So we're taking up a whole host of other legislation. I mentioned that environmental bond bill on coastal resiliency. That's going to be big news. I'm hoping. We had talked earlier about a capital improvement bond bill that we had worked. I filed monies for, the armory across the street, resources for Cape Cod Community College. We're hoping that comes out. We just passed a $1.8 billion housing bond bill that's going to provide significant monies, not only for the development of Capital A affordable housing, but also for workforce housing. So this is the housing for people who make 80%, like 150, 60, 70% of very median income. They're currently left out. So lots to come on the budget piece. A conference committee has been appointed. They've got to figure all this stuff out by July 1st. We send the budget to the governor. Sometimes the governor will make some vetoes. We often will override them. And all that will be wrapped up by the beginning of July, and with a lot more legislating to do right to the finish line on July 31st.
Yeah, not a whole lot of days.
Nope. We like a deadline. It's good, but we're getting things done. I actually think I've actually been surprised. I feel like I've been able to get more done in legislation than I actually thought I could in my first term. So I'm hoping we can keep that up all the way to the end.
Fantastic. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Paul. I appreciate it.
Meet Barnstable Land Trust at Eagle Pond on Old Post Road, Cotuit, on Friday, June 8th, 9:30 to 11 for a swamp walk. Join the Land Stewardship Coordinator, Will Holden, and the LAPC on an exploratory 2.5-mile hike through the Eagle Pond Sanctuary, highlighting two unique habitats, a red maple swamp and an Atlantic white cedar swamp. They will stop at both swamp habitats to briefly discuss some of the characteristics that define each habitat, the common wildlife found, threats, and more. Here is a look at this week's boards, commissions, and committees. I'm Paula Hersey, and thank you for watching Barnstable Today.